Today's conversation is with John Venier, ON, who I'm going to let introduce himself, because I understand what you do, John, as being a draftsman, a project manager, a design consultant, I suppose, for the creative industries. But best to let you introduce yourself and tell everybody what you do, please.
Hi, so John Venier, left Norwich School in 2011, and I'm now working as a scenic project manager within theatre live events. So that kind of entails looking after the scenic side of things. So basically the scenery, the set, the staging. So everything that kind of encompasses is something that I'll be looking to project manage.
Okay, so are you employed by any particular institution, or are you freelance and put contracts out for work?
So a bit of both. So my first job kind of in the industry after graduating uni was for the Royal Opera House, where I was working as a construction draftsman. So in that role, I was predominantly just drawing up the scenery for the stage. So all of the Royal Opera House productions, all of their scenery kind of goes through a drafting process before it's kind of handed to the kind of carpentry and metal workshops to build. More recently, I've been working with an event production company called Light Fantastic Production Services, who are based in Ayleshire in Borehamwood, near the film studios. And their work is a lot more commercially based. So it's for companies looking at brand activations or product launches. I've also done kind of film premieres and things in Leicester Square, looking at the staging and set for those, or kind of private parties, so weddings, birthdays, events. There's kind of a lot more scope to kind of what I do with them. And also I work as a freelance draftsman and project manager. So I've also worked freelance for Somerset House. So for their skate installation, which was a kind of annual event in the courtyard until recently, and also as part of their summer screen with Film 4 and summer series with their kind of live music events. So I've kind of done a bit of work for them as well, and for other companies.
Yeah, so it's a really broad umbrella of sort of scenic management. Is that a reasonable?
Yes. So I guess, scenic project manager or kind of scenic consultant, predominantly drafting. So doing all the kind of technical drawings for that. So it might be site plans. It might be actually figuring out how something gets built out of steel or timber, and actually detailing those components. So, working drawings for a carpenter to then go ahead and build. Mm-hmm. It might be looking at health and safety documentation. It might be looking at doing kind of staff training on the kind of drafting software that is being used. So there's a whole kind of load of kind of aspects of the job.
Okay, and this is quite niche, quite specialist, I would suggest. Did you always know that this was what you wanted to do when you were at school?
Not at all. So I think during my years of sixth form at Norwich School, I was doing maths, physics, and 3D design. My last year of study there, and that kind of guided me into what I thought would be architecture. So I actually went to Oxford Brookes University and studied architecture for 2 years, just because those kind of mix of subjects seem to kind of lead in that direction. That's kind of what a lot of other people were kind of going into. That's something I'd kind of looked at and really liked, the aesthetics of buildings. When I was there, I realized that it wasn't quite for me. And that, in fact, I knew what I enjoyed doing at school, and it was a lot more focused on the kind of 3D design aspect of things. Right. And alongside that, within the extracurricular side of things at school, I also enjoyed getting involved in the kind of school productions, so the senior school play, or helping out at events like the jazz night that was back then, but not from an on-stage perspective, but actually being behind the scenes, doing either lighting or in the workshops, actually helping with the scenery and things. So I kind of took that on board, and then, through looking at UCAS and prospectuses and everything like that, I actually found courses in London and further afield that specialise in what's called scenic construction.
Uh-huh.
So that is actually a course that is kind of specifically for film set and theatre scenery design and manufacture. So I studied scenic construction at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, bit of a mouthful,
Always, yeah.
in Northwest London in Swiss Cottage. So that was a 3-year degree course, and that kind of taught me, it was a lot more hands-on, a lot more practical, actually building sets for theatre. And it was kind of talking about the fundamentals of theatre and learning, a lot more about what goes on behind the scenes. And essentially that's kind of then, where I felt, at home and was comfortable doing that. And that kind of has just taken me on a path with the Royal Opera House into kind of event production and kind of broadening out a bit more now as well.
Oh. So did you withdraw from your architecture course at Oxford Brookes? Did you complete that degree, or did you withdraw and start looking?
No, I withdrew early. So at the end of my second year, I kind of made the decision that I didn't want to continue. So yeah, quite a big decision, but I could just tell that it wasn't for me at the time. So I took a step back and actually thought back to what I enjoyed doing at school, and the architecture, the couple of years that I did complete of it really helped highlight kind of what I was good at and what I was enjoying. So it's not as though that time was totally wasted, because actually a lot of the skills that I learned during those couple of years have now actually applied to what I'm doing as a scenic project manager in events in the entertainment industry, because architecture taught me the fundamentals of technical drawing and orthographic drawing from an architectural perspective. So I've kind of taken those key skills and built on them and learned more about that, and I'm now just kind of using those same skills but in a different industry.
Did you know that the courses that you eventually did at Central School existed, or were you advised that might be? So how did you go about finding those courses, because they're pretty niche?
I have no idea how I found them. I don't think I certainly didn't know they existed the first time around when I went to uni. I think I might have been slightly blinkered in the fact that I just kind of thought maths, physics, 3D design, architecture. I think it was kind of architecture or product or furniture design or something along those lines, or automotive design were the kind of things that were in that field at the time. But I had no idea that these courses within theatre and film set and all of that kind of existed. Until I then went back and actually started, during that time out after my architecture course, started looking at, okay, well, there's acting courses and everything, but that's not what I want to do. I want to be on the other side of that. So it was then looking at, the specialist drama colleges and all of that, and seeing the courses that they offer. And I think through that, I found out that there are actually courses, all over the UK that will do some kind of background in technical theatre. Most of them seem to be in and around London, but there are some that are further afield.
How has, I'm thinking purely in terms of 2020 and 2021, how has the pandemic affected? I mean, theatres have been shut largely. How has things affected you?
Hugely. I mean, generally, the two industries that I specialise in events and theatre have, for the best part of a year now, been completely shut down. There was a small period where they reopened, but it's the theatres and producers are trying to get back on stage, and certainly around Christmas. There are a lot of companies that were trying to push out the kind of pantomimes and everything, because that's kind of the real spirit of theatre around that time. But churning thousands of pounds into these kind of productions, and then the London Palladium panto, that is probably the biggest one in the UK, I think it had its opening night, and then the new restrictions came into place and it closed. So these venues are facing a huge challenge as to whether they try and artistically plan a program, but then potentially end up making a huge loss because they're not allowed to open. So it's a similar thing with events as well. I've got down the line with so many events. Somerset House again. We're looking at putting on dodgems in the courtyard instead this year because the kind of main ice skating thing can go ahead. But again, it's just been pushed back, delayed, and it's now at the point I think they've put so much into it. It's difficult for them to cancel it, outright. But it's just, each delay is costing more money. And I know so many scenery companies, that are based in London that have gone under because, although the theatres are shut and the theatres are being somewhat supported by the government, it's actually all of those subsidiary companies that work with the theatres. So whether that's lighting rental companies or the workshops that are building the scenery, all of the costume manufacturers, all of those companies that, the theatre industry relies on, they're not getting so much support. So they're the ones that are kind of suffering. And, a huge amount of the workforce, because it's predominantly freelance in the theatre, are kind of either retraining as, electricians, et cetera, and kind of moving away from the industry. So I think that, there could be a problem there when things come back, because a lot of the people that have been loyal to theatre for years have now moved away from the industry because of the lack of support, just to find a way to survive. So, I think it could be a very interesting opening up for theatres when it does happen.
Yeah. Are you beginning to hear about projects that are going to happen? Are there seeds of hope that things are?
Yeah. So I'm seeing more and more articles now about, certainly the big theatres like the National Theatre. You've got some of the opera houses as well that are planning for this government's new kind of easing of restrictions, the kind of 4-stage plan, I think it is, where, I think stage 3, they're allowed to open with social distancing, and then stage 4 is, fully open without that distancing. But, it's not just the kind of, okay, restrictions lifted, you can open now. It's also the kind of audience engagement. Is the audience willing to go back? And a few surveys that I've seen is kind of hinting at they're not so prepared to go back. And certainly with the restrictions and everything in place and the social distancing, generally a theatre has to have at least 70 or 80% occupancy to break even, let alone make a profit. So if, a theatre's capacity is reduced to 50%, every performance they put on is going to be making a loss.
Yeah.
So again, although, I've heard in the pipelines for some of the big theatres that can afford to do that, but certainly the smaller, kind of affiliate and, fringe theatres probably are going to really, really struggle. So yes and no. Again, with live music and events and everything, there's a few festivals that, are promising to come back this year. I think Reading and Leeds have said they're going to try and go. But there's certainly been a lot that I've heard of have already been cancelled for this year, just because it's not worth the risk.
No, it's such an incredibly challenging time for those of us that love live music and theatre. It's desperate for it to come back, and hope that everyone can. In normal times, if there is such a thing, do you have a typical day, or is every project different? Talk us through some of the main tasks involved with the work that you do.
Okay. So again, it depends whether it's kind of theatre based or live events. There's kind of a different process for each of them. But generally, if it was kind of a theatre show, it would be working alongside a designer. So I'm not actually the person designing the show, not designing what you're seeing. That's generally done by a freelancer. So they'll come in with a design. They'll generally have a packet of drawings and sketches or renders alongside what's called a model box. So they'll have a scale model of the theatre at 1:25 scale with their set in it. So they'll have made a kind of model of the set. It's then kind of my design interpretation. So I'll take each piece of the set, measure it to scale or work from drawings if I've got them, and then kind of figure out what materials are needed and the kind of construction methods used to be able to get this kind of 1:25 scale model from this size made out of card and paper and matchsticks kind of thing, up to, you know, a 10-meter wall that's being built, you know, in the Royal Opera House or a back wall somewhere. So kind of design engineering, as you will, each piece of scenery, and then that kind of goes through the stage of, you know, once it's been kind of designed and drawn up, I've then got to cost it, so work out the materials in it, what that's going to cost, how long it's actually going to take to build. So, you know, how many carpenters there are available for it, if there's any steel work, going through that whole process of kind of scheduling the build and a production to make sure it can kind of be completed on time and in budget. So generally for all theatre shows, and actually with live events as well, you actually work in a backwards kind of calendar format. So you know your opening night, or your you know, when this event is happening, and you work backwards from there. So you know that you'll have a day or week or a couple of weeks of rehearsals. That takes you back a couple of weeks. You know, you then know that there's going to be time painting and finishing the set. You've then got your actual build time in the carpentry workshop, and then before that you've got the time that I'll spend drawing. So you're always kind of working back so that you know where those kind of deadlines are, if you've got rough estimates of how long everything will take.
Are there any particular projects? You talked about 10-foot wall on the stage of the Royal Opera House. Have you got any particular projects that you've particularly relished or were incredibly challenging? Anything that sticks in your memory?
All of them, I think. A lot of them. I think Death in Venice at the Royal Opera House, which was on maybe a year or two ago now. That was kind of one of the only projects I worked on solely as the kind of main draftsperson at the Royal Opera House. And it was actually a very technically complicated set. A lot of the walls were on tracks suspended from the fly bars in the theatre. So all the scenery was kind of crossing over and moving over each other. The added complication with a lot of opera and theatre as well is that because it tours to other parts of either the UK or in the Royal Opera House's kind of repertoire in the world, it was actually going off to Vienna as well, which had a stage probably about 2/3 the size of the Royal Opera House. Every piece of scenery that you design, you know, has to have specific breaks in it, so you can kind of take that chunk out, close the set up, make it smaller, and kind of make it fit on a different stage. So I think actually, you know, spending, I think, pretty much the best part of 9-10 months on that one production, then actually seeing it on stage at the Opera House, and you know how it all looks finished, painted, you know, is really kind of satisfying. And the thing is, if you compare it to the kind of scale model that you were working with, it always surprises me, because you're kind of like, well, it looks exactly the same. But actually, that's a good thing, because you need it to look the same. So you've got this kind of tiny model that you can hold up in front of it and then kind of see, well, you know, that's where it's come from. So yeah, it's kind of a lot of the challenges in the.
Yeah. How much interaction do you have with directors in this field? Any artistic input, or are you purely working from their design, which is done, it's not open to discussion, so on and so forth?
So directors, not so much. Their directors are kind of involved mainly with stage management. I will kind of be in contact with the designer or the production manager, who is the one that looks after kind of all the money and the overall schedule for the production. My kind of area is in the scenic side, so the set and staging. So you've also got the other kind of departments like lighting, sound, costume, special effects, all of that kind of thing. So the scenic side is just one part of the overall production. So generally, a lot of my conversations are had with the designer to make sure that, you know, what I've done is right. So, you know, I've taken a model, drawn it up, they'll kind of check things through, or we'll have to produce samples for them. So if there's a particular type of Art Deco molding that they want, or a certain paint effect, or a certain finish, you know, a technique that might not have been used before, you know, we'll have to create a load of different sample boards, and then generally they'll come in for a day, look at all the samples and colors kind of laid out, and kind of make their choices then that will be applied to the kind of whole set, essentially.
Okay. And it must be, you mentioned it there, it must be a lovely moment to go and see your work being used on stage with an audience. That must be quite a buzz, is it?
For me, it's the kind of full circle of, you know, you were there pretty much right at the beginning when you're talking about the feasibility of it, and, you know, whether you've got enough money to do it and the resources to do it. There's always that kind of period at the beginning where, you know, items of scenery may be cut because they're too expensive or they'll be reduced in size. So it's kind of making the set fit the budget. And then you kind of go through this whole process of drawing it, you know, seeing it progress through the workshop as well, because you're kind of project managing it through the workshop to make sure that it's being built right and everything as well. You know, seeing it painted and then fitted up in the theatre. But then actually it's when you've got all those other departments coming together, you know, the lighting on it makes such a difference. The sound kind of putting you in that moment, the costumes taking you to that particular style or era. And then, of course, you've got the actors and the people that are actually the ones using the set. It's all designed to transport you and the audience to that exact place. So you've got that escapism from the real world for a couple of hours. So, you know, I feel that, you know, generally I'll try and see as many productions as I've worked on as possible, because it gives you that kind of satisfaction, and you can kind of see actually how it's being used, which I think is one of the most important part. Well, it is the most important part of the set, because if they're not using it in the way you've designed it to be used, you know, it doesn't work for the actors, and that's kind of what you've got to do. So, you know, there are some people, you know, some of the carpenters or some drafts people won't see it. It's not something they're particularly interested in, but for me, I think it gives that kind of full circle kind of satisfaction of actually seeing, okay, well, this is what it looks like, not under, you know, natural sunlight or, you know, fluorescent lights that are in the workshop. It's actually lit properly. You've got all the haze and smoke and, you know, special effects working, and this is where you can see it kind of really pop and come to life.
Fantastic. I can't wait to get back to the theatre. I'm just thinking an auditorium. That's wonderful. What's the worst bit? This must be a challenge. Timing, money, deadlines. There must be some pretty awful moments.
So I think it's when things don't go to plan. You know, you can certainly spend weeks, days, weeks, months, you know, ages working on you know, the design of something, thinking it's going to work, and, you know, in principle there's no reason why it shouldn't, but then you actually come to put it all together, look at it, and it doesn't work. There's just something that isn't quite right with it. Either director or designer doesn't like it, or it doesn't move as you were intending it to, if it's, you know, a dynamic piece of scenery. But I think the great thing about theatre is that that's what everyone in theatre is involved with it for, because it is, you know, it's not easy. It's, you know, I think the whole thing with theatre is, you know, you've got that problem solving aspect to it. And the great thing about it is you're surrounded by like-minded people who are all in the same boat as you. And, you know, essentially you're all working on the same team to fulfill a common goal. You know, you all want it to be ready for opening night. So, you know, if something doesn't work, or, you know, even at the drawing stage, if something isn't working, or if, you know, I'm getting really stuck and a bit flustered, there'll be other drafts people I could speak to. I could speak to, you know, the carpentry foreman, or, you know, the head of steelwork, have some ideas with them, talk to the artists, see what they need from it. And then, you know, if it has got to that kind of late stage where it's up and not working, it's, you know, everyone kind of coming together, getting everyone together, having, you know, a production meeting, and, you know, discussing this piece of set. So why isn't it working? Identifying those areas, and then actually coming up with a plan of, you know, either how we can fix it and make it work as intended, or if that's not going to be possible, then just kind of giving the designer and director some expectations of actually how it might have to work slightly differently because of various constraints with either budget or time, or, you know, safety as well, because everything that we're doing, if we've got a 1-ton wall at the back, which, you know, is unsafe, you know, we need to let them know that, and kind of modify things for for that purpose.
Wow. Okay. So coming back to Norwich School, if I had some young people now who wanted to get into your particular line of work or theatre work generally, not necessarily on the stage, how would you advise them? What would you tell them to be doing and to look for?
I think one of the most important things is to actually be going out and seeing theatre. I know that's difficult at the moment, but I think lockdown has spurred the kind of progression of online streaming of shows. So you've got the National Theatre Archives now, which I think has a streaming service. Broadway HD. There's so many streaming services out there. Even YouTube has some kind of plays on them. And when theatres do open again, go out and watch some shows. If it's it doesn't have to be the big glitzy lights of the West End. Theatre Royal in Norwich is great. You've got the Madam Market, Playhouse, Puppet Theatre, and go out and watch it. And while you're watching it, if you have to go back and rewatch it a second time, first time truly captivated by it, go back and watch it a second time and actually think, okay, well, in this moment, I really enjoyed it. But why is that? Is it because of, the actor? Are they doing something funny? Or is it because, how that moment has been lit with the lighting and the soundscape, or is the set doing something really clever? And identify what it is that actually is really kind of sparking that interest in theatre, and kind of go from there. Really, if it's certain things about the lighting that you like, or if it just looks really beautiful, you might want to start thinking about set design, lighting design, sound design. If it's the actual, wow, this is really cool set, I wish I could be the one building it, looking at scenic construction kind of things. There's so many different courses out there, and there are some that will kind of merge all of this together in a 3-year course where you get to kind of rotate around different sections of everything before going off and specializing. So it's kind of finding out what it is you like, and if it is really broad at this moment in time, look for a foundation course or something out there that you can go and do and get your hands on, or even contacting the theatre and just say, seen this production, really like if I can do a backstage tour, or just come and have a look around before the show opens. And generally they'll be really happy to have you. I know that some of the theatres do arrange backstage tours anyway for $5 or a tenner or something.
Yeah.
But if you can't see that advertised, email the box office. Ask them to pass you on to someone in the technical team. If there is that department you're really interested in, and just kind of get talking to people, because theatre and events especially work on that kind of connection between people. So if you're not being proactive in kind of going out and talking to people, you might want to rethink that slightly, because going out, making those initial kind of conversations and connections can really help you in the long run. And again, if you've gone into a theatre and said, spoken to the production manager, said, really interested in this, etc., you never know, in 3 or 4 years time, when you've graduated in that course, you come out looking for a job, and this production manager is advertising a position, you can say, well, I'm interested about this field because I came and spoke to you 4 years ago at this production in Norwich. And they'll be thinking, what? Okay, well, clearly, they've got a passion and a spark for it. So it's again, making the conversations, do your research, but I think more importantly, go out and see this kind of stuff, because without it, you can't possibly tell if it's for you or not.
Yeah, fantastic. Brilliant advice, John. Thank you very much. If you could talk to your 18-year-old self again, or now, what would you advise him to do? Anything different, or knowing what you know now?
I think potentially, take a step back at times. Feel free to make mistakes. Again, nothing is set in stone. You've got a whole lifetime ahead of you. So, if you go for a course, or, specializing in something and it's not for you, don't be afraid to say it's not for you, and actually, kind of look back and focus on what you did enjoy and what you do like, because, there's no problem in changing what you're doing, because, essentially it's something you could end up doing for the rest of your life.
It's a positive decision to change. If
so,
something,
it's making it work for you and not for anyone else. Really. It's your life. So, I think probably, go back, do your research, look at all the courses that are available, and talk to people as well. Your team there is, a great resource. And if you don't know about a particular subject, I'm sure you'll probably know people that do, or know someone who knows someone else that might. So again, it's all about those connections. So,
okay. In terms of your own ambitions, well, as a final question, John, where do you see yourself in 5, 10, 20 years' time? Is there something particularly you would like to achieve, or?
Nothing set in stone. I think I would like to be more independent freelancing, working on, some high-end West End musical shows, or festivals are something I'm quite interested to get involved with as well. So yeah, I think bigger and better, but again, I think it will take a little while for the industry to recover. But after that, looking at kind of expanding and going further with it.
Okay. I have my fingers firmly crossed that theatres and festivals and gigs and all the rest of it come back as soon as possible. I think as a race we are poorer without them, definitely. So yeah, I hope for everyone's sake that they're back soon. John, I can only thank you for your time this afternoon. It's been fascinating to hear about what you do, and the advice you've offered for our young people is really pertinent. And I know that we have some pupils who will be really interested to hear what you've said and take your advice. So on behalf of the Norwich School community, thank you very much for your time, and I hope the theatres start opening for you soon, and I also hope we'll be able to invite you back to Norwich School very soon as well.
Right. All right. Thanks
very much, John.
Thanks.
Cheers.